Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to the KSL.com Game Center podcast. It is Tuesday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, and we are joined today by Josh Furlong to talk about the Utes, talk about Utah football. It is Valentine's Day, which has a little bit of a red theme, right? So we can go with a little bit of a color theme there with talking about Utah today. Mostly, this is kind of spurred by some news that came out last night that offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig is going to be sticking around, not leaving to go after what was a rumored position at Notre Dame. So yeah, kind of just want to bring in Josh to touch on that breaking news, but also just kind of give us a little bit of an update on what's going on with Utah football during this offseason ahead of spring ball starting in March. So welcome on, Josh, and I guess what were your thoughts? Kind of just maybe first of all on that breaking news about Ludwig sticking around.
Yeah, to me, it was, it's an interesting move, not to stay, but necessarily to entertain the Notre Dame job. I think, Notre Dame obviously has a lot of cachet in college football. The historical perspective alone kind of makes it an intriguing position to want to consider. But for the longest time, I've always felt that Andy Ludwig was going to kind of ride out in the sunset when Kyle Whittingham does. I think he's from Utah originally. He was born in Ogden, went to Snow College. There's a lot of home that's still here for him. His family's here, and so for me, like the odds-on favorite was that Ludwig was going to stay. But then things kind of started to ramp up a little bit. There was a lot of chatter that Ludwig was the leading candidate at Notre Dame. They fly him out there to really kind of see everything. He was filmed at the hockey game at Notre Dame, meeting with the team, Marcus Freeman, their head coach, and it really got a lot of people panicked and a lot of people, worried about what's going to happen because Andy Ludwig has meant a lot to Utah's offense, just simply for what he's been able to do to make it improve. Everywhere he's gone, he's been able to improve an offense and has really helped. So it would have been a big blow for the team, especially at this point in the season where there's just not really an easy way to transition a new offensive coach in. And so like you lose that, it would be a devastating blow. So it was surprising in some respects, just simply because of how far along they'd gone. Ludwig was interested in bringing offensive line coach Jim Harding with him as well. Notre Dame was perfectly fine with that because their offensive line coach retired. So it was one of those things that Utah fans especially we're on DEFCON whatever it is 10 or I can't remember, is it backwards or 4, DEFCON 1 DEFCON yeah.
I'm not even sure at this point.
But it was a dire situation, and at the end of the day Ludwig decided to stay. He's at Utah. Maybe that gives him an extra payday. He's already one of the highest paid offensive coordinators in the Pac-12, and so he's doing fine. But I think this is just his home, and it makes a lot more sense to be able to have the consistency and the stabilization there that comes from Kyle Whittingham's program.
Yeah, no, you mentioned how much it could have changed kind of the outlook and narrative for this program had he left, and with how far along things got in with Notre Dame. It was certainly a possibility. But you look at the guys that decided to come back, like Cam Rising, and a bunch of other seniors that they could have left, but they decided to quote unquote run it back, right? And I think that narrative around this top 10 team running it back, being this kind of perennial power and just being consistent. Well, you lose a major piece of that consistency, right? If your offensive coordinator leaves. So yeah, obviously kind of maybe dodged a bullet there in some senses, but it seems like you mentioned, this is home for him. They know what they have. They know what they want going into this next season with these guys coming back. And speaking of that, Cam Rising, once again injured in that final game in the Rose Bowl, confirmed this last week that it was indeed an ACL injury and had surgery to repair that. And so with any ACL injury, obviously there's a bit of a lengthy timetable there for rehab and recovery. I'm just curious kind of what you've heard on that front, and maybe what you're expecting as far as what his offseason is looking like, most likely being out of spring ball next month as well.
Yeah, ACL injuries anymore, they're pretty commonplace. So it's not a matter of not understanding how your leg is going to heal or anything that way. I mean, there's still stuff that can come from that. Sometimes they have to go in and do a second surgery to kind of clean some things up. But for the most part, these are pretty standard surgeries nowadays. And the timetable is generally about 9 months. Some guys heal faster. There was an NFL player, I'm blanking on his name right now, that he was back, I think, something like 6 months or less, and it was pretty crazy to see. But for the most part, it's a matter of how quickly he heals. And he said that he got the surgery about a month ago, so he's about a month into his process and what he's doing. It's the same doctor that did the surgery on Brant Keithy, who's also coming back to Utah as a tight end. So yeah, he's not going to be able to be available for spring practice in terms of being able to physically be out there and run an offense or anything that way. But the benefit that he has is it's not his shoulder like from a few years ago. He's got the opportunity. He can still go out there and throw. He's maybe not able to plant or do different things that way, but at the same time, he's able to at least keep the mechanics sharp and do whatever he needs to do that way. And once he does get cleared, that allows him to be able to work. Now, with that being said, Kyle Whittingham says that he feels confident that, Rising will be the starter on day one. I don't know if I would have that much confidence. I mean, Whittingham's, playing the odds game, I guess, but there are a lot of questions going into the season. They obviously have, I think it's 83% production returning on the offensive side of the ball. So they've got a lot of guys that know the system. Rising obviously adds that value to it to be able to help kind of keep with what Utah's been doing. But I'm curious to see, what his health status is, and we're not going to know anything really until about summertime, if not closer to Pac-12 media days, which will be at the end of July. So, I mean, at this point, you've got to, if you're a Utah fan, you've got to hope that he heals quickly and that he's able to do what he needs to. But, at least what the injury is and kind of what that rehab looks like.
Yeah, and even with guys like Rising and Keithy coming back and bringing back 80% of their production, Utah still had their first top 25 recruiting class in program history. So I'm curious, the spring ball will be the first chance for some of those guys. I'd imagine maybe they graduate early, not all of them, obviously, but who are maybe some of these newer guys that you're looking at to maybe make a surprising impact early on in their careers.
Yeah, this is one of those areas where Utah's continually improved in their recruiting class, and they're going to get a lot of guys that come in that are ready to go. There's a handful. There's not a ton that are coming in for uh, the spring session. I believe it's only 5 or 6 guys that are coming in early. But one of those guys, especially, is Spencer Fano. He's an offensive tackle. He got a ton of praise, a lot of love. He was close to a 5-star recruit. I mean, he wasn't quite there yet, but I believe he ended up in the top 50 area. And so I think this is one of those areas where, look, if Utah can stay competitive in the trenches and really secure that up, that goes a long way. As we've seen in college football, especially, if you can secure an offensive line that can do a lot for your quarterback, it's real easy to let everything else happen, right? Like, obviously, receivers have to be able to catch passes and the running backs have to be able to do what they need to do. But if you can have an offensive line that gels similarly to what Utah got last year out of their offensive line, it goes a long way. So he's somebody to look forward to. One of the ones that is interesting is Mikey Matthews. He's a wide receiver, got bumped up to a 4-star right there at the end of the recruiting season. He's kind of one of those higher end guys that Utah really hasn't been able to get in terms of production in the receiver corps. And this is an area that Utah really needs to find success in. They found their kind of niche with the tight ends and being able to have last year Dalton Kincaid and Brent Keithy and Thomas Yasman, but now they need to really kind of explore, more outside threats, deep threats, and being able to have that. And Mikey Matthews coming in the spring, that definitely helps. It allows him to get the playbook faster. So those are 2 names that I'd probably say would be interesting, but there's so many guys on this roster that are coming in that are going to help Utah. And they've already got guys everywhere else that are going to help, that, return missionaries or guys that have been with the program. So it's interesting to be able to see kind of where this Utah team goes, especially as the Pac-12 continues to load up with all of its quarterbacks.
Yeah, it seems like everything's really coming together for, another great season, probably a top 10 season again for Utah. And who knows, maybe even talk of a playoff berth, right? But I am kind of curious, you mentioned, we're talking about coaching, talking about Andy Ludwig, and maybe that he probably wasn't going to leave Utah until Coach Whittingham left. And there's obviously been talks over the last few years about, how much does Kyle Whittingham have left in the tank, right? And looking at this next season, Cam Rising's last season, Brant Keithy's last season, kind of the end of a certain era here with the team. What are you feeling as far as the vibes of, could this be Whittingham's swan song?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I kind of go back and forth on as I cover this team. There's definitely been times over the last 2 years where I'll leave a press conference, and I've even made mention to this some other beat writers, where we kind of get the sense that it's like, this is it. He's hanging it up. And then there's other times where it's like, no, he's good for another 5 years, right? And I think that's honestly where Whittingham is. I think there's days that he can definitely see himself retiring and calling it quits and hanging out with his grandchildren, which have become a much bigger priority in his life as of late. But then, he still loves the game. His team is successful. They're continually growing. It's not like, the program is falling backward. And so I think this is one of those areas where, he's all in on his decision, but he's conflicted in the sense of when to leave, right? And I think, it really comes down to if he's still having fun. That's what he's always said. He says, as long as I'm continually having fun, I will continue to coach. And you see that a lot with professional athletes or coaches, that when it starts to feel like a job, guys kind of want to walk away, right? Like they don't want to do it that way. It's they want to feel that passion. And I think you'll 100% see that from Kyle. So, I would not at all be surprised if this is his, swan song. It's his last year. To me, he's not going to make a big deal out of it. It
Mm.
would be one of those things where, at the end of the season, if they win a bowl game or whatever, maybe even if they don't, it's just going to be one of those things where he kind of passes the torch on and carries on with his life and goes on as his special assistant that they've created in his contract and move on. So could it be this year? 100%. But it could be another 3 more years too. So it's hard to predict, but I think we're getting closer each year as it goes on. I think, he really does want to be able to see this program get to at its highest peak. Whether they can do that this year, I mean, they've got one of the toughest schedules they've ever had with 11 Power Five teams on their schedule. So if you can do that, get to the playoffs and kind of make that capability possible, I mean, why not go out on a high note?
No, for sure, for sure. And it's hard to blame him, right? Like with all these guys coming back, with how well they've done, it is fun. Like they're a fun team to root for. It's been fun to watch them these last few years. So I'm certainly excited to kind of enjoy whatever lasts this next year or so, that we know for sure that this team is going to be contending and be among the best teams, if not only in the West but in the country. So certainly wishing Cam Rising a speedy recovery, that he can get back and lead this team again. And certainly spring ball will be the first, next month, first taste of some of this of the next year. But like you mentioned, we'll kind of have to wait until the summer and into the fall to see kind of the full extent of what this team's capable of once again. But thanks for coming on, Josh. I don't know if you have any other closing statements or shout outs you want to give to any youths or anything on the beat.
You got to be careful. You almost sounded like a Utah fan for a bit. Your BYU gradness was going to come
Hey,
out, and you got some people that are going to be upset.
I'm just trying to remain as neutral as possible. Okay. I'm
Hey,
just
you,
trying.
you covered the spring game for me last year, so
I
it's
did.
like,
I did.
you
Yeah,
can do it. I'm not saying you're not. You're a professional journalist. You know what you're doing.
exactly. And we're now with this podcast, we're not tied down to any certain beat, any certain team. So just trying to spread the love around, and give the fans of each team stuff to look forward to with each of their teams. So yeah, that's it from my side of things.
I love it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, anyway, thanks for hanging out, guys. We'll catch you next time on the KSL.com Game Center podcast.